This isn't part of the night. Just something strange. Uh, Ever since I got here, something about this cross has bothered me. It's because it's not asymmetrical, right? The cross beam is way too small. But as I'm looking at it from down here right now, I went over and talked to Carl. So, do you mind if I just said this? How long did that middle piece? Do you think it's 20 feet? 25? See, if I bet I would get up there, or one of us would get up there, I bet our arms would just stretch across that crossbeam. Then it makes me wonder how far up you would have to be if this were, 4 foot in the ground. How far then still would you be up? So the truth is, it actually kind of fits. If you look at it, it does fit. And our arms would go across there. And we would be that high up above everybody else. And that would be scary. Carl?
Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord?
"9:00 p.m. Thursday night. The suspect, commonly known as Jesus, meets with top members of his alleged organization in a Passover celebration known as the Last Supper. 10:00 p.m. Jesus and the members of his alleged organization leave the Last Supper en route to a garden called Gethsemane. Judas, the accountant of Jesus' alleged organization, leaves as well but travels to meet with city high priests Annas and Caiaphas. There they assemble officers to arrest Jesus. Judas is paid 30 pieces of silver for this. My servant grew up in the Lord's presence like a tender green shoot, like a root in dry ground. There was nothing beautiful or majestic about his appearance, nothing to attract us to him. He was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with deepest grief. We turned our backs on him and looked the other way. He was despised and we did not care." Isaiah 53, 2 through 3.
Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they nailed him to the tree?
Arrest, incarceration, and trial. 1 o'clock a.m., officers depart to infiltrate Jesus and his organization. The altercation is to take place at Gethsemane. Security forces for Jesus falter, and members of his organization witness the suspect sweating blood. Officers arrive at Gethsemane to find Jesus waiting. Many members of Jesus' organization at 2 a.m. flee the scene. Peter, an alleged lieutenant of the suspect's organization, defends Jesus. Peter assaults Officer Malquis, resulting in bloodshed. Jesus intervenes and heals Officer Malquis. It is believed Jesus to have said to his lieutenant, "Those who live by the sword die by the sword." He is handcuffed and transported to a holding cell owned by Caiaphas, city high priest. Jesus is incarcerated there and awaits trial. 3:45 a.m. A team of lawyers and high priests plan to indict Jesus on charges of fraud and various infractions of the laws of Moses. Alleged members of the organization, Peter and John, witness the trial. 3:50 a.m. Jewish attorneys interrogate Jesus on fraud and cult activities. The suspect, Jesus, testifies that his teaching was open and in full view of the public numerous times throughout the last 2 years. A police officer for the high priest strikes Jesus across the mouth with the back of his hand, shouting, quote, "How dare you speak to the city priest in such a way?" Jesus replies, quote, "I have spoken facts in plain truth. Why do you strike me?" Unquote. 4 a.m., Jesus' alleged Lieutenant Peter reportedly denied knowing or having any affiliation with the suspect's organization an approximate number of 3 times. Yet it was our weaknesses he carried. It was our sorrows that weighed him down. And we thought his troubles were a punishment from God, a punishment for his own sins. But he was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sins. He was beaten so we could be whole. He was whipped so we could be healed. Isaiah 53, 4 through 5.
when they pierced him in the side. Were you there when they pierced him in the side? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they pierced him in the side?
Sentencing and execution. 5:00 a.m. A rooster crowed at dawn, but no verdict is reached. Instead, the team of lawyers determined that a higher court is needed to try Jesus and his alleged organization. 5:10 a.m. Jesus is transported to a Roman government facility where he awaits the higher court's trial. Governor Pontius Pilate is set to preside over the hearing. Jesus is a Galilean, therefore Pilate grants jurisdiction to Herod, a Jewish king. Jesus is again transported, this time to Herod's facility nearby. 5:30 a.m. Herod directs Jesus to perform the alleged, quote, healings and miracles. Jesus remains silent and performs no said miracles. 5:50 a.m. A disappointed Herod sends Jesus back to Pilate. Herod has his security staff, though, dress the suspect in a bright white robe and make juvenile jokes to mock his appearance. Jesus is still not sentenced. 6:05 a.m. Jesus is again returned to Pilate for sentencing. The suspect is now being referred to as, quote, the King of the Jews. Pilate's wife warns Pilate to, quote, have nothing to do with this just man, unquote. Her warning comes after her so-called vision. Pilate is conflicted. 6:10 a.m. City High Priest Caiaphas and Annas incite the crowd against Jesus. Pilate offers a choice of pardon, as is the Jewish tradition over Passover. The choice is Jesus or Barabbas. City high priests and crowd choose to pardon Barabbas, a convicted murderer. The crowd wants Jesus executed by crucifixion. Jesus has yet to be sentenced. 6:15 a.m. Pilate interrogates Jesus alone. After a discussion about truth and whether Jesus is the King of the Jews, Pilate orders Jesus to be purified by Roman centurions. Purification entails the suspect be beaten with wooden reeds to bring the blood to the skin's surface. 6:30 a.m. Roman centurions use lead and bone-tipped whips called cat of nine tails to rake the blood out of the suspect's bruised body. This is known as scourging. Pilate hopes this will satisfy the crowd. 6:40 a.m. Pilate's security staff, hearing that Jesus is referred to as the King of the Jews, fashion a crown of thorns and press the sharp tips into his forehead. They place a rough and soiled cloak over Jesus' lacerated shoulders. 6:50 a.m. Pilate presents Jesus to the crowd after purification. Jesus' skin has multiple lacerations with points of exposed bone. His face is marred with blunt force trauma and obvious swelling. 6:55 a.m. City high priests and the crowd are now chanting, "Crucify him." Pilate asks rhetorically, quote, "Crucify your king," quote. The crowd shouts to Pilate that the suspect is not their king, quote, "We have no king but Caesar," unquote. Pilate is eager to free Jesus, but he cannot convince the crowd that now grows into a mob. 7:00 a.m. Pilate decides to show his disapproval of this event by washing his hands before the priests and crowd. Jesus is then sentenced to execution by crucifixion and is immediately taken to the holding area to await execution. 7:45 a.m. Jesus and the other convicted criminals are forced to carry the crossbeam to the site of their execution. Jesus is bearing the deep cuts of the scourging and purification. The jagged and blood-stained beam causes his wounds to bleed more. 7:50 a.m. The three criminals begin their march to Golgotha, the hill traditionally used to display criminals amidst their execution. The practice is designed to deter other citizens from criminal activity. 8:15 a.m. The march is taking longer due to the fact Roman executioners strike Jesus repeatedly. Jesus falls several times and is forced to bear his cross after each fall. The crowd is jeering at the criminals and taunting Jesus to, quote, save himself if he is the king of the Jews, unquote. 8:35 a.m. An onlooker is forced to help Jesus with the cross as the suspect's body is giving out. Simon of Cyrene is the man who carries the cross for Jesus to complete the march to the top of the hill of Golgotha. 8:55 a.m. After rejoining the cross members to the vertical member of the crosses, the three criminals are stripped of their clothing and are affixed to both horizontal and vertical beams. 9:00 a.m. Jesus' left arm is stretched out over the horizontal beam while one executioner holds his arm straight. Another drives a large nail through the suspect's left wrist. The same thing is done for the suspect's right arm and right wrist. The practice of nailing the hands had been abandoned due to the fact the nails ripping through the hands, allowing the criminal's arm to move freely. 9:08 a.m. One executioner pulls Jesus' left leg straight while the other ties the ankle to the vertical beam. Once the ankle is secure, Jesus' right foot is joined over top of his left foot. One soldier holds both feet in place while the other drives a larger nail into first just above Jesus' right foot and then continues through just above Jesus' left foot and eventually into the vertical beam. 9:20 a.m. The nails sticking out of the back of the cross are then pounded sideways to lock them in place, and the crosses for each criminal are hoisted into the base. With a large thud, they are secured in place. Three criminals are now being crucified. All of us, like sheep, have strayed away. We have left God's path to follow our own. Yet the Lord laid on him the sins of us all. He was oppressed and treated harshly, yet he never said a word. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep is silent before the shearers, he did not open his mouth. Isaiah 53, 6 and 7.
Were you there when the sun refused to shine? Were you there when the sun refused to shine? Oh, Sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when the sun refused to shine?
Summary. 10 a.m. It has now been 12 hours since Jesus shared the Passover meal with his disciples. From 10 p.m. washing feet to 10 a.m. having his feet pierced to a cross. How fast Caiaphas, Annas, the Jewish attorneys, Judas, Peter, and the rest of humanity went from apprehending him to crucify him is amazing. 10:30 a.m. Jesus looked down from his cross to see many dividing up his clothes while others still mocked him as the King of Jews. Jesus asked his God to forgive them, for they know not what they do. 11 a.m. John, one of Jesus' accomplices, and Mary, Jesus' mother, come to the site of his execution. Jesus looks at John and says, quote, "Son, behold your mother, and mother, behold your son." 12:30 p.m., Jesus cried out that he thirsted, and a soldier placed a cloth on a spear, dipped it in sour vinegar, and touched Jesus' lips with it. 3 o'clock p.m. After 8 straight hours of arrest, trial, shackles, scourging, mocking, beating, and carrying his own cross over his lacerated shoulders, and after 5 additional hours of being nailed and hanging to the cross, Jesus looked up to the heavens and shouted, my God, why have you forsaken me?" From there, Jesus uttered the phrase that means, "It is finished." His head then dropped. He gasped his last breath and died a criminal's execution. Unjustly condemned, he was led away. No one cared that he died without descendants, that his life was cut short in midstream, but he was struck down for the rebellion of my people. He had done no wrong and had never deceived anyone, but he was buried like a criminal, and he was put in a borrowed grave. Isaiah 53, 8 through 9. We need to leave now with 0 words and 0 conversation.